My name is Don Flo, and it's my pleasure and privilege to function as our moderator for this afternoon session. And really on behalf of all the panelists, I want to say thanks to Wake Forest for allowing us to participate in this. And for me personally, it's a real pleasure because the panelists are folks that I admire, and I think you will learn to really admire them as well as you hear their stories and hear their contributions they make to today's session. Our three panelists are Steve Reinemund, Laura Nash, and Mike Bontrager. Steve is the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, and Steve had a distinguished career at PepsiCo where throughout his tenure, you would say that PepsiCo flourished really on every measurable metric you can imagine. But beyond that, his leadership was also characterized by his focus on developing a culture that had some distinguishing and clear value characteristics to them, and also invested in the leadership of a diverse culture for the future for PepsiCo. Laura Nash is an educator, consultant, and author who has written thoughtfully and carefully about the relationship between people's normative beliefs and how they are integrated or not integrated into their work. And Mike Bontrager is the founder and managing principal of Chatham Financial, and through his company, he's intentionally created a culture that expands the framework for defining the purpose of his business, and has been very intentional about describing a set of values that have been fully integrated into his business. So I think all three of them have a great deal to say to us today. We're going to focus on three basic sets of questions and our comments. First, what is success in a broader context, and how have we tried to live that? So it'll be one, a definition in terms of descriptive nature, and then secondly, how we try to give expression to that in our own lives. Secondly, how can we institutionalize that understanding of success? How do you go from the personal to the institutional and organizational life? And thirdly, what do genuinely successful places look like? What are the signs that are visible as you look inside from the outside of an organization? Our format's going to be each panelist is going to speak for a few moments. We're going to interact some, and then we're going to open the floor for conversation and questions. And so we greatly encourage you to ask us really about anything you're thinking about, and between the distinguished group we have here, I'm confident there'll be a coherent explanation or response to that. So Steve's going to start us off. Steve, thank you.
Thanks, Don. I'm extraordinarily impressed to see the number of students that are here on Friday afternoon in 80-degree weather, and it's probably the prettiest day you've had. So, but I do notice, fellow panelists, that the students are all sort of located by the door. So if our talk isn't interesting, we'll see what happens here. But as I think back on my 23 years with PepsiCo, I'd say the most difficult, significant, and yet rewarding experiences were not directly related to the bottom line, contrary to what some people might think, although I feel pretty good about our bottom line performance during those years. To me, it's almost as though the bottom line was necessary but not sufficient. And it's sort of like the financial results enabled and were enabling to the bigger picture issues that we dealt with. One of these issues, and the one that was the hardest and yet the most rewarding, and I believe the most significant, was the work we did to make diversity a reality at PepsiCo. As a bit of an aside, I believe, and I talk often on this, that I think the biggest social issues that we face in society today are challenges that the overall business community worldwide has the legitimacy, the responsibility, and the opportunities to address. And I don't want to get off on this subject because it's a whole nother topic, but I do believe that the business community in the United States and around the world has the opportunity to address the most difficult issues that we face as a society. And one of those very difficult issues that is certainly foremost in the minds of many people in the United States is this whole area of diversity. And I think business is taking a leadership role in this area and probably has the best opportunity to truly make a difference here. The diversity journey for me was a very personal one, and one that was also an important professional one. It was a challenge that we tackled I like to say, from an offensive position rather than from a defensive position. We started with a vision, and that vision, simply stated, is that from the boardroom to the front line, we wanted the people of PepsiCo to reflect the populations that we wanted to serve as customers. Sounds easy, much more difficult to accomplish. But we adopted some very basic fundamental beliefs, and they were, first, the vision was good for business. Second, just like any business objective, the vision would require an aggressive strategy, clear and measurable goals, and we had to hold people accountable for achieving these results. And third, the vision was not only good for business, but it was the right thing to do. And I like to think about it as both a head and a heart kind of a challenge. The diversity journey was, without a doubt, the hardest single challenge I ever took on in my business career. And during my 8 years as Chief Operating Officer and then Chief Executive Officer, I would estimate that about 50% of my discretionary time was dedicated against this objective in one form or another. We had successful milestones as well as disappointing setbacks. And there were personally embarrassing moments along the way as well as very gratifying accomplishments. And I'd like to just put add a little flavor to this, and in the Q&A I'd be happy to add more flavor to it, but just give you a few examples of what I mean about this journey and how it was personalized. The first time I realized that diversity was a real business challenge that truly impacted what I call the soul of the company was in the mid-1980s when I was leading the Pizza Hut business, which PepsiCo owned at the time. On my very first day as CEO, I'll never forget, I went back to my office after just taking over the company, and I was served that afternoon with a lawsuit. And that lawsuit lasted for 5 years. And at the advice of counsel and advisors that I respected, I had turned the matter over to the lawyers during those 5 years and had very little personal involvement in it. But after 5 years of legal wrangling and, frankly, winning two times in federal court, the lawsuit just simply wouldn't go away, and it got much nastier. And against the advice of close advisors, I decided to get involved personally because I believed it was impacting the culture of our company in a very negative way. As it turned out, it was probably a lot worse than I even thought. So I sought out some of the most prominent, I need to back up, maybe I didn't mention it, but the lawsuit was filed by one of our largest franchisees who happened to be the largest Hispanic franchisee in the restaurant business at the time. So I sought out, after I decided to step in, I sought out some of the most prominent Hispanic leaders in the country to help me understand the situation. And during that interview process, I met a leader by the name of Raul Izaguirre, who was at that time the president of the National Council of La Raza. And for reasons which he can't explain today, and nor can I, he agreed to help me. And during the opening comments, when we got the three parties together, Arturo Torres, who was a franchisee, and Raul and myself in a small office, and we got together, I hadn't said more than 10 words before Art got furious, and I couldn't figure out why. And immediately, Raul stepped in, started speaking in Spanish to Arturo, and immediately things changed. And to make a very long story short, after 3 days of literally 24-hour, around-the-clock negotiations, we resolved the issue. But I realized through this experience as never before how difficult it is to marry different cultures. And that experience was the beginning, for me, of a journey that I really credit Raul for enlightening me on and encouraging me along the way. And after the case was resolved, I went to Raul and I said, I really would like to not only thank you for helping me, but to pay you for what you've done. And he refused to accept any money. But he said to me at the time, he says, I'm not going to accept anything, but I have one request, and that is that you go forward from here on and do the right thing for the Hispanic community. Frankly, at that point, I didn't know what the right thing for the Hispanic community was, but with his help and leadership over the years, I became to better appreciate what that meant. I went on to chair his corporate board, and he became the founding chair of PepsiCo's Latino Hispanic Advisory Board. And although Raul and I see many issues from different perspectives, and we do differ on a number of political issues, I've learned so much from my friend, and he's influenced my thinking in many ways. And despite our differences, we have a common bond on some of the most important beliefs in life, such as faith, justice, family, and fairness. That was sort of the beginning of my journey, and I have many other stories I'd be happy to share along the way, but I wanted to share that because this journey is clearly a commitment. It's a business objective, but it has to be an important personal commitment as well. And you have to believe that it is not only good for business, but it's the right thing to do. And like any other thing worth doing, we did see some measurable results. By 2006, over 50% of our board of directors were diverse, including 3 women. Over 50% of our senior management, the most senior managers of the company, were diverse. Our turnover, which was our biggest single challenge for many years, our turnover of diverse employees was at parity between white males and all ethnic and gender groups, and we track that on a monthly basis. And my successor is an Indian woman who did not get the job because she was diverse, but because she was the most qualified individual for the job. And the results of the past year would prove that to be the case. There's much more to becoming a truly diverse company than numbers, but without numbers, you can't even start. In 2004, in the annual report, in the chairman's section, I stated that I believed our progress at that point was responsible for 25% of our top-line growth that year. So I truly do believe that it's good for a consumer products company, but it's also the right thing to do. As I reflect on the diversity journey, I realize that managing a diverse team of leaders is more challenging and more complex than leading a homogeneous group. But I know from experience that better results come from this complexity. My team at Pizza Hut was a great group of leaders. We achieved some remarkable results. We had a lot of fun together, and we still see each other regularly 15 years later. But we were all white men in our 30s, had families all within the same age range, and we had more things in common than we had differences. And all of these leaders went on from our Pizza Hut experience to even greater roles in PepsiCo and other companies. But I have to say today that as much fun as that was and as successful as that team was, they were not as successful. We were not as successful as my PepsiCo team when I was CEO, which was a diverse team of talented executives that brought all different points of view, skills, and cultures. Through complexity, we made better decisions and got even better results. We made real progress against cultural issues such as diversity, health and wellness, sustainability, and defining and infusing common values within the company. In closing, I would offer the opinion that the truly rewarding, life-enriching business experiences go deeper than the financial bottom line. It is the efforts around doing the right thing that make the vocation of business a noble cause and a calling that does, as our chair, Don, has said in many times, it stretches the limits but brings satisfaction and a sense of true accomplishment. So, Don, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Laura?
Thank you, Steve. I should confess that I've since our topic is flourishing. Can you hear me? Yeah. That I've seen Steve flourish in many stages of his career, and the genuineness with which he has brought values and concern for both the corporation and people has been really extraordinary. So if some of us today talking sound a little more like endorsements than thoughtfulness, I know you'll push hard on us in the question and answers, but I do want to endorse everything you just said because I saw some of it live time as an outsider looking in on the company. I'd like to change the subject, keep to flourishing, but take another look at flourishing. My own background is not as a business person, but as a business professor and writer for a great number of years, more than I'm going to let you know. And I left Harvard Business School and the faculty there a year and a half ago. But during the time I've been teaching and writing over the years, the question of flourishing has always been at the top of my list. So whether it's an ethical issue or a corporate culture issue, I think we always get back to what is the definition of a good life? What is the definition of good work? What is our concept? What does that look like? And I know there's a lot of anxiety about that today among graduate students and among faculty and business people. Is it possible to have a good life, to lead a good life, to lead a vocation within a business context? And Don very challengingly asked us, we had a phone call before this event, hoping to be more responsive to what you might be thinking about. And Don mentioned Charles Taylor's kind of juxtaposition of, first you have a career, and then there's the social good, and you know, how do you negotiate those differences? Kind of the two-or metaphor that David Brooks talked about yesterday. And I have to say I disagree with that metaphor. I think the two can be complementary. I don't think they always are. But I'd like to start by saying there is the possibility of living out the social good through business and through capitalist corporations, but it is constantly under threat. And what do we bring to that picture? So what I'd like to bring to this picture is some of what I've seen in the operation of people struggling to flourish and leaders struggling to flourish. Sometimes I use the word lasting success as a metaphor for this. What is real success? It's not just becoming a success in your career or building a successful society. It's building something you can sustain. And I think we've seen in the last weeks even, people who are these really stellar leaders on the surface becoming celebrity failures in a very short time because they've operated in a way that is unsustainable at a personal level. Before I go any further, we were asked to speak about ourselves, and I find that extremely embarrassing. I write books about what other people do, so this is very hard for me, and it's my growing situation, I guess. But I would say never expect your own struggle with trying to listen to your call, negotiate a career that both is about you and about others. Never expect that to be even and neat. There is no, some of you may be in gridlock looking for a silver bullet solution. I know in my own experience it was probably a little too messy, but the only thing you can do when it's that messy is listen to your values and ask the question, where will I be flourishing? Where can I get help in flourishing from the context in which I situate myself in a job? I situated myself after college in what I thought was a very neat thing. I won a Danforth Fellowship. Mark Twain is another fellow at the same time I was. It was a great opportunity to go to graduate school. I got a PhD in Latin and Greek. I taught at Brown University for a number of years. I loved doing it. I loved teaching. I loved the classics. I always saw the classics as an exercise in observing and struggling with questions of power and delusion, human delusion, which is also a religious theme, as we know. And after a while, it began to occur to me that, A, there were no jobs in this field that were of a permanent nature. At Brown, there were 11 tenured males, and they were all under the age of 50. It was going to be a long time before any jobs really opened up. But secondly, I had a messy set of inclinations in my own soul, which had to do with the state of contemporary life. It was just post-Vietnam, and the world was in very bad shape. It was just as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, bribery was being discovered in American business in a very systematic way on foreign contracts. And I suddenly realized I wanted to bring what I knew about the classics to the analysis of contemporary life. And I didn't know a classics department that was going to let me do that at the time, and the liberal arts was very much specializing at that moment. Maybe it was my personality, whatever it was, I knew I had to mess up the pattern, and that was a very tough decision after investing in graduate school. And when everyone said, what are you going to do for a job, admitting to them that I didn't know. There's a little pride involved here. And fortunately, one summer I had experimented. And this is what I would urge all of you to do. Reach out for the possibilities out there in the world. I went off to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and found any job I could find. And the job I found was typing at Harvard Business Review. And after a week there, they said, yeah, you can type, but you can also write. And they made me an editorial assistant. So when I went through my career search 10 years later, I went back to them. And I asked them, what are you thinking about? What are you doing? Well, it turned out that at just that moment, they were struggling as an institution with the question of how do we write, research, and teach in business ethics? We can call this luck, and I do think it was lucky. We can call this divine guidance, and I wouldn't be that presumptuous. But I think what we can say is there was a fit there for a new context that would let me in the door and think about human flourishing in the context of modern society and business. And I really had to test. I had to take classes. I was lucky. I got a postdoc. They paid me to study. That's an awfully nice thing to have happen. And I ended up on the faculty at Harvard Business School, helping start a very new field at the time. So the first thing I would say is don't try to narrow your search. Don't try to, I think you get so much advice right now. Focus, focus, focus. Get a leg up. I just wrote a book called Just Enough, and I'm going to talk just briefly about an idea in it that really, as we looked at lasting leadership in writing this book, we discovered that flourishing leaders don't benchmark on one thing, that human satisfaction and human flourishing really rests on 4 dimensions. It rests on a desire for achievement, puzzle solving, problem solving, making a difference in the world by changing the world. And that requires dominating things, innovating, and the rewards are often hierarchical. And that's a very important thing. If we didn't have that, our world would stagnate. Growth would be stopped. It's a word we argue about. The second category that people seem to benchmark on is happiness. How successful do you feel your career will be if you're so busy or so driven that you can't experience happiness? Now, some people try to buy their happiness through their achievements, and they'll say, I'm happiest when I'm at work. But if you dig down, if you drill down and watch them at work, the ones who are happy only when they're driven at work. As Elliot Spitzer put it, I'm an effing steamroller when you put me on a problem. Those people self-destruct. They don't know how to experience relaxation, relief, surrender in a way that helps sustain them as leaders. So happiness is the second. The third is significance, being of value to others. Who would consider their career a success if they didn't feel that it made a difference to other people in the world they cared about? And I think anyone who's ever created a product and discovered a customer loves it, is willing to shell out good money for it, any person who's written a book and had someone come up to them later and say, that really changed my thinking for the better, knows how that kind of spontaneous thank you is one of the biggest rewards you can get out of your career. And building in that search for serving others was, I think, the thing that the executives I've interviewed in my work have found the most rewarding. It's kind of what's lasted with them. But they've done it in ways that have made their institutions flourish as well and circled back to achievements. It's not messy. The fourth category was legacy, building a platform for the next generation to succeed. Well, I've written a book about it. I hope you'll buy it. It's called Just Enough. But I also I want to talk just for a second about how those 4 categories so differ from the way many schools and many business people prepare themselves for a career these days. And I think it is really a critical problem in our society, and behind a lot of the anxiety. We seem to live in a world of never enough. You know, never enough work, never enough toys, never enough money, genius solutions. We seem to benchmark as idealistic Americans on maximized solutions. And if you do that, you can't go for multiple goods in life, because you can't maximize two things at once. It's not possible. You will have to choose your priorities and set limits on how far you push yourself in one direction if you're going to keep open the possibility for happiness, achievement, significance, and legacy. This is a very different model of success than saying vocation and success are all about Aristotelian virtues, character, courage, honesty. This is a model that says we have deep satisfactions that help us flourish as human beings. We're imperfect at satisfying them. Okay, this is not heaven. But that I would argue part of flourishing is not just solely about others, it is partly about you. Because if you don't flourish, you're not going to be able to help others. If you look at the biography of Mother Teresa, for example, she was fabulous on achievement, fabulous on significance, saint-like devotion to legacy. But she was unable to let go and relax and experience happiness. In fact, she felt guilty when she got exhausted. She felt she was failing her mission and her search to be closer to God. Several times she had to take to her bed for that reason. And at least on one occasion, the church agreed with her and called in an exorcist. I say very few of us have that saint-like capacity. We need to renew, energize, and much of that can come from your work. If you listen to that deep voice inside that says, what brings me closest to the extraordinary? What is the problem I can't put down? For me, the problem I couldn't put down was being a loudmouth writer and taking it into contemporary society without leaving classics behind. And that's been the struggle of my career. When I looked at these four dimensions, they came out of talking to many leaders, observing people like Steve at work. It seemed to me that these four benchmarks kept popping up over and over and over again. And your preparation for a career has to start now. If you're not experiencing these four today in your student life, take a look at that picture and ask yourself why. How satisfied are you with this balance? Ask the advice of people who know you about how they see you experiencing it. When you fire on these four dimensions, you flourish. And I will leave you with the story not about myself, because I did talk about myself. But someone I interviewed was actually working with named David Stern. And David Stern is head of the NBA, and the National Basketball Association. Many of you have seen him on television. He's often in the media. And he and I were asked to be on a panel at the World Economic Forum. And again, we started talking to prepare. And he lives in a very tough, very competitive environment. It's a cynical environment. He puts on 140 television shows called Basketball a year. And people don't always play nice in that field. And he's developed a pretty tough exterior. And sometimes he has a social conscience, and he gets so cynical that he can present a very negative view about the possibility of business creating social good. So he and I were on the phone, and he started in on that cynicism, and he doesn't stop talking. He goes on and on and on. It's finally I said, David, I'd just like to ask you one question. I understand your cynicism, but could you think of one moment in your own leadership that gave you deep and lasting satisfaction? Is there a possibility for that? What does that look like? And the most extraordinary thing happened. He stopped talking. He never stops talking. And I just waited, and I timed it. And for 2 minutes, there was silence on this phone call. And then he said, Magic Johnson. He said, when Magic Johnson discovered he had AIDS and he came to David, this was a moment when the association and the league had never come to terms with AIDS. They'd only seen one other player diagnosed with AIDS that they knew of, and that person simply disappeared. Just removed him quietly from the league. And David said, I was determined that we would not make magic disappear. And it was an uncomfortable topic at the time. They took it on. Basketball is a bloody sport. There's blood on the court, as you know. They had to change the whole way they went after AIDS. They took it on with the public. It jeopardized their reputation to the audience. Today, NBA players go around the world with AIDS education programs. It institutionalized into an obligation to the common good. And it's the moment he's proudest of, and I think it has kept him going when he thinks back on that moment, when he stood for the right thing in a way that carries him through all those other tough, unromantic times. So if you're hitting times that don't look totally romantic, or you don't face the perfect solution to what you're up to, I would say, look again, look for those small openings of possibility in each of these areas, and start practicing now.
Terrific. Thanks, Laura. Mike?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Don for inviting me. I'm fairly certain I was invited because I have any breakthroughs in frameworks on how to think about these things and about either work or human flourishing. But hopefully I can contribute in just more on the side how one very small company has tried to go about implementing some ideas about work and purpose in our lives. Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, he gave a speech to Harvard Law School back in 1995 entitled The Psychology of Human Misjudgment, where he goes through 24 causes of why people make grave errors in judgment. And that's not the topic here, but he had one almost throwaway comment, but one I believe that has huge implications for companies. And that was about how the cash register had a great moral impact on society. Here's what he said. He said, there are huge implications from the fact that the human mind is put together this way. And by this way, he meant that we instinctively respond to incentive structures that are inherent in organizations or in society, even when we don't realize it. He said, there's huge implications from the fact that the human mind's put together this way. And that is that some people who created cash registers, which make most dishonest behavior difficult, they're some of the effective saints of our society. And the cash register was a great moral instrument when it was created. And Patterson knew that, by the way. He had this little store, and the people were stealing him blind, and he never made any money, and people sold him a couple of cash registered. And the store went to profit immediately. And, of course, what did he do? He closed his store, and he went into the cash register business. Smart guy. So while I doubt that the inventor of the cash register really was thinking of the societal impact, its invention does create an environment that encourages, it doesn't enforce, but it encourages honesty. And I like to think of these tendencies and these soft incentives sort of like currents in a river. The cash register really created a behavioral current in our society that makes it easier for honest people because they can swim with the current. And dishonest people need to swim against the current if they're going to succeed in their dishonesty. To take a little bit more of a macro example, if a society really only functions with bribes, then the honest person has to be a very strong swimmer to be successful in that environment. And this is a framework really that we use at our company as we've been building it. How do we create a company where these currents that we create, where they're positive? And at Chatham, our goal really has been to create currents that encourages the things that are good about a person. And we have 5 core values. We talk about respect and relationships and excellence and integrity and teamwork. And we want to also create currents that discourage behaviors and attitudes that go against what most of us would consider being people of good character. I have a good acquaintance who was the global head of derivatives at a second-tier financial institution. And he told me that he had to regularly decide between making his budget numbers, which of course affected his bonus, and doing what he felt was really best for his clients. And while the bank spoke about always doing what's best for the client, putting the client first, and they had a mission statement to that effect, of course my friend realized that the currents that were created by the compensation structure and the promotion criteria, it really created this incredibly strong current that encouraged really bettering your bonus at the expense of the client. He really tried hard to swim upstream for quite a few years, but he finally did give up, and now he's teaching high school in California. And at Chatham, I'd say we think a lot about how to create these currents that, first of all, encourage the right people who are going to want to join Chatham, but then secondly, we're Chathamites, and that's what we call ourselves, they can swim with the current rather than needing to swim against it to remain true to their personal values. Let me give you just a little overview about Chatham and how we got to where we are today. We started 17 years ago as an interest rate and currency hedging advisory shop over my garage, and today we've grown to about a little over 200 people with our home offices outside of Philadelphia, and we have offices in Denver and in London and Singapore and in Krakow, Poland. We handle the hedging needs of some of the largest real estate and private equity investors in the world, as well as advise to mid-cap financial institutions, mostly on asset liability management. You know, while we've had a really great run over the last 17 years, we're far from figuring things out. And certainly the current market conditions is just presenting us with a lot of very steep challenges. One of the questions that was asked is, that we were asked to address is, how do we define success? And how do we live up to it as a company? You know, when one thinks about living a life that matters in terms of work, most people think in terms of, for example, being a healthcare professional or a counselor or a social worker, you know, a profession where you're tangibly helping others. But if you want your work to have meaning, and you're working, say, in the world of finance or in corporate law, you know, it obviously feels more difficult to identify really the social good that you're creating. And many people that I know, I think, resort to what I kind of call the extraction model in their quest for meaning. And that's where they really view their work as extracting money out of, I'd say, in the worst case, a system that is bad, they would consider, or at best case, a system that is neutral. And then they invest that money in good things. So in other words, they extract so that they can be generous on things that they would consider matter. And one's ability to be generous and give things that matter really shape their view of personal success. And at Chatham, I would say we don't really subscribe to this extraction model. And rather, I think we probably think more in terms of what we could call kind of a restoration model, for lack of a better term. I'm still looking for a better term. Our mission, really, our mission is to restore our little corner of the world to a place that has more integrity and more transparency, where relationships matter more and people are treated with respect without regard to their role or their position or their compensation. You know, and the way that we've defined our quest for success is through what we call our 4 purposes. Now, I don't have time to go into each in depth, but let me briefly give them to you. First of all, we say we want to change the markets that we serve, and that's the interest rate and the currency derivative markets, by making them more transparent and understandable. We want to make sure that our clients are paying a fair price and that we want to keep them out of trouble, which is not a small feat these days. Secondly, we want to make our clients better, not just seeing clients simply as a source of revenue today and in the future, but really work as a team member with them for their betterment and for their best interests. Thirdly, we want to make better Chathamites. This means that we're not only interested in developing people so that they can be better workers and that they can execute what we need done better, but through understanding teamwork and how to work in teams, understanding how to work through conflict and practicing servant leadership, that they can become better parents, better spouses, better neighbors, better community volunteers. And lastly, we want to make an impact on our local community as well as the world. Now, I realize this 4th purpose sounds a little overambitious, but for us, and I could spend a lot of time talking about it, which I won't, but it simply means that we've dedicated resources in our local communities to make them better because we were there. In other words, we want to be investing, not extracting. The world component of our 4th purpose has taken the form of involvement in microfinance for developing countries, which is the provision of small loans to the entrepreneurially poor that's been making just a huge impact in the world. We're using our currency hedging expertise to solve one of the large barriers of capital that's having problems getting to many of these developing countries. And we've created a company that's actually starting to do currency hedging in frontier currencies that you just could not get hedges in prior. And it's a lot of fun. It's on the cutting edge. People absolutely love that we're doing it, and the people that are a part of it, this is just huge for them. And it promises to just make a huge impact in this market. You know, we believe that our purpose of making the market more transparent, our first purpose, is serving an equal social good, then same as tutoring at the local youth center that we helped found. Both are helping to restore something that is sort of broken or at least strained. One is helping a client get a fair price on a complex transaction where the knowledge gap puts them at a huge disadvantage in a system that favors the more powerful. Tutoring is helping students improve their grades and hopefully their lives, where their socioeconomic standing puts them at a huge disadvantage in a system that favors the more powerful. Both are seeking to restore either a broken or a strained system. It's a mission like this that, in our view, creates real meaning in our work, whether we're executing a derivative trade or whether we're tutoring high school freshmen. At least I know that that's what it does for me. I told Don that I hesitated to agree to be on this panel in the first place because I feel like we are really only in the second chapter of a 10-chapter book. We still don't know how the story is going to go. We're a very small company, and many of these ideas that we have just not withstood the pressure that larger companies face. You know, we're in very challenging times here in the market, and they're going to test us in ways that we've never been before tested. And we haven't passed that test yet, and I'm concerned that the worst is not yet over in the markets. So in a way, I wonder what right I have to really talk about some of our lofty ideas. So as you listen, please just bear all of that in mind, but I thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Those are terrific comments from all three folks, and I'm going to take just a moment as well to talk about some things that I've learned along the way briefly to frame it, and then we're going to open it up for between us to talk a few moments. I've got some great questions that came out of here I'd like to hear them respond to, and I want to piggyback on what Laura has said a bit and talk about what I've experienced in terms of the kind of deep personal needs that need to be addressed in the workplace for folks to find real meaning in their work, to flourish in their work. And I summarize that in three ways: purpose, significance, and community. A purpose in my world means doing something worth believing in. And that needs to work all the way down to the entry-level employee in the business. They need to believe in the work they're doing and see how it contributes not just to the organization, but to their customers and how what they're doing makes a difference for them. Which brings to the second point, significance. It means knowing that I really contribute. Someone that what I do matters. A person who mentored me along the way said that to me once, accountability is the greatest gift you can give someone, Don. Now, I played sports in college, and accountability meant I sat on the bench. And so I'm trying to think, how is that a gift exactly? And he said, because that means their work actually counts. Imagine what it'd be like to do work all the time that doesn't really count. And so when you help someone understand the difference they make and how they contribute to the well-being of the entire organization, their whole involvement of their full identity picks up. And lastly, community. It means that knowing that we belong, that we are included, that we're part of this, and that we have a common unity with a group of folks who have a common purpose. Those three areas are very powerful motivators because they address three of the deepest human needs that we have: purpose, significance, and community. And I would suggest that money and status and power will not substitute for meeting those three needs in the workplace. When those three things are missing, you can buy people's loyalty for a short period of time if you pay them enough money, if you give them enough status, or give them enough power. But it's not sustainable. And over time, you will lose people's hearts, their heads, and their minds by not addressing those three areas. Secondly, it's been my good fortune to have known a number of people who had quite successful lives, as we would define them, and I think in the deepest, richest ways. And I've had a chance to interview them and ask them about their lives and kind of how they got like they are. And here's 4 things I've learned from them. First, they're able to think about their formative experiences and how those formative experiences influenced their life. That is, how they gave shape to their life, whether it was family, sports, neighborhoods they grew up in, schools they went to, military they participated in, that all those things came together in a way, and they were able to reflect on those. In my own life, I went to an integrated junior high and high school in a time when that was very unusual in the South. And in fact, I played on a basketball team where I was the only white person. And on the team, the coach was African-American as well, and we played African-American schools. One time I was the only white person in the gym. And that was the year after we had a riot in Winston-Salem. And, race was just never an issue for me. I was free of that because the friendships I had. And so sports played a very important role in giving shape to who I was as a person. I didn't realize that was happening at the time, but of course I realized it much later in life as I look back and I gave shape to me. Secondly, was a network of relationships. And those folks were able to talk about a diverse set of relationships they had that influenced their life. Not folks who were just like them, but folks from a wide sphere of life who gave shape to who they were. And that was very, very important for them of being able to look and see how that person, in a sense, had deposited part of who they were into their life. Thirdly, they had developed a coherent set of what we would call controlling beliefs. That is, what do they think about people, the nature of people? What do they think the good life is? What kind of things do they hold deeply that they would say gave shape and definition to who they are as people? And lastly, what I've come to call first loves. That is, they understood where their deepest passions lay in life. And they're able to go and address those as time unfolds. Now, often when you have your first jobs, your deepest passion is your first paycheck. But over time, to be able to say, where does my heart really reside? And how do I make sure that I'm addressing that in some way? Some of us can give full expression of that at work. Some we do in multiple spheres of life, but never letting their heart die. Always kind of addressing the things they care deeply about. Those 4 things, formative experiences, a network of relationships, controlling beliefs, and first loves, they were very intentional about looking back and reflecting on those 4 areas and how they impacted and developed their own lives through those experiences. So I thought we might take a few moments and talk some about what came across here in the panel, and I heard a number of things that I'm very interested in, and although I could stay here all day asking this question, I want to make sure that we do open it up for many other folks. First, there's a question of personal flourishing and how you renew yourself. Folks who are in leadership positions for long periods of time can rigidify themselves and not be in a place of continual learning and openness and giving expression of that. And so one of the things I'd like to have us talk about a moment itself is folks can talk about periods in their life where there were very significant moments of renewal of their own life, renewal of their own visions for leadership as it related to their work, and maybe how that gave expression in new ways. Secondly, there is this whole role of business in society. And most of the ways you've heard all of us grappling with talking about that is not strictly language from the business world, what we might call strict kind of business language. And we're grappling to find language that I think reaches us in a deeper, more human level. And I'd like to hear us talk some about how we've tried to find those words ourselves in the workplace, to find common words and common language that can be glue that kind of address the deeper aspects of who we are and how we build organizations around those. And you've heard Mike already do some of that, I think. And lastly, this bigger issue of business and the role it plays in society. The role it probably will play in a worldwide aspect as it relates to a number of societal problems and issues, and how it gives expression to that. And in particular, I have an interest in the role of religion and the role of business and the difference and difficulties of normative belief structures that are brought all over the place in the world into specific cultures. You know, the truth of it is most of the kind of interfaith dialogues where everybody kind of dumbed down what they believed and pretend like they didn't believe anything of importance didn't work. All of us need to bring our deepest held convictions, who we are, to wherever we go. That's how we bring our whole selves in that setting. But that's complex if you're Steve dealing with 100+ countries that you're doing business with, and you bring your executive group together to say, all of us bring our deepest selves to work. Because that's the most just thing we can do, plus it offers everyone to bring their gifts. So how do we learn to do that in the workplace, and in fact, perhaps model that for our society in a deeper level so that our own cultures, in a sense, get infused by what's spilling out from our business world. So there's a whole group of conversations, I think, that interact back with what was said. And so anybody like to take a shot at any of that kind of babbling, please run off on this table. And if you don't answer, I'll call on you. Steve, Laura, Mike.
I'll take a shot at the last one. I think David, in his remarks earlier this morning, talked about the role of religion in the workplace, and we've spoken about it often because I think what he was alluding to is that in this whole role for diversity in the workplace, be back up just a little bit. I think business today is tackling the critical issues of diversity on a wide basis that other institutions in our society have in the past led, but now are not taking leadership positions, whether that be government, whether that be the military, NGOs. A lot of this has fallen to business to take on. And I think some of the easier issues have been addressed. Racial issues, gender issues, sexual preference issues. And each time we step to the next level of discussion, we thought that this was the most difficult level we'd ever dealt with and that we couldn't work through it. But frankly, I think this whole area of religion in the workplace and religion in our society and the acceptance of religion in our society is going to clearly surpass the previous ones in complexity by a long shot. And frankly, those organizations that can successfully start addressing it first are going to have plow a lot of new ground and frankly, from a business perspective, probably have a competitive advantage that if they can do it. You would think that the academic world would take this on, and in many cases, some of the social issues of the past, they have been taken on by the academic world. Whether this one is taken on there or not, as a leader, I don't know. But as it relates to business, I think David said it best when he said, the real issue is how do we allow our people to bring their entire self to the workplace in a way that doesn't intrude on the rights of others. And it's easy to talk about. It's hard to actually put into practice and to articulate in ways that everyone is going to perceive to be fair. But I believe, as David said earlier this morning, those people who don't address it are going to find themselves not being on the offense, but being on the defense, and that defense can get pretty ugly at times if it's not dealt with correctly. So I do think that if you just think about the trend of, if you think about religion in the workplace as the next evolution of diversity, you might take it on that way. I think, frankly, it's much more than that, but that might be the way that business can deal with it, is to take it on as a business issue similar to the other diversity issues that we've addressed in the past. I know in our company, it's an area we're wrestling with right now, and we're making some progress. But I think along the journey for these diversity issues, sometimes it looks pretty messy, and you don't think you're making progress on it. But they usually come in relatively small and messy steps at the beginning. But I think it's an important issue and one that many people are trying to address at this point. So.
I'll change the subject a little, but I think I couldn't agree with you more. And I know Dave Miller and I are involved in something that's just starting as a potential research project at the conference board on this, and it is such a complex issue and so uncomfortable. It's such a burning issue. I think it is the diversity challenge and growing in our business society. We need to get behind it fast. There's nothing more divisive than not being able to handle religious diversity when power and money are involved. And we need to get a handle on how we're going to create a flourishing business society. And hopefully it will be a model for some national dialogue on this. You asked the question, again, how does religion come into this? And I've asked that question through 2 research projects that led to books and wrestled with it myself. And I think one of the things, there's an area that to me is particularly perplexing. So I want to share it with you as both an area of opportunity and an area of thought. We have so many good thinkers in our audience who gave us many great concepts to think about this morning. I want to throw a lot more concepts at us. But if you think about those 4 categories I mentioned, to live out the opportunity for being of significance to others, which would clearly be part of most concepts of calling, to be able to experience peace, to be able to withdraw the ego long enough for prayer, which is another kind of happiness, to be able to care about others enough to create a legacy that's not about you, but about their success. You have to have some kind of felt spirituality and mutuality with other people. This is where it can't be all about you. You also have to have the ego to be competent and dominate problems. You can't give that up. But where do we get this feeling of mutuality? And I think business presents us many opportunities for mutuality, from teamwork to shared enjoyment of products and purposes of business. But then when you think about mutuality in a Christian concept, there's a big disconnect here. The mutuality in business is conditional. Businesses thrive and flourish when their employees feel some sense of mutuality. But it's still conditional on employment. And you aren't going to drop off the face of the earth as a human being if you lose that employment opportunity. And no one is going to treat the end of your job as murder. So you've got to recognize it's a hard, cruel world out there. I love creating great products, but if nobody will pay me for them, there's a conditionality there to how much I'm going to do on product research and development. So there's a kind of conditionality in business that is part of the system. It regulates the marketplace. What will you pay? What will you offer? What will dominate a market situation? And we're used to that, and it helps us play out the ability to serve, the ability to enjoy life, the ability to innovate and improve the world. But when you look at mutuality in a Christian concept, it's an unconditional love. It's a transcendent experience. And I'm not sure where we meld those 2 realities. I'm not sure we can meld those 2 realities. One of the things we may be doing is putting too much expectation on business in terms of our spiritual development. There's many opportunities to do more, but in some cases I think maybe we're trying to do too much in creating a seamless existence. So that's what I struggle with. What is just enough religion in the workplace? What is just enough spirituality? And again, I get back to the flourishing. When are the signs bad? When you see explosive or exploitive people using religion as a weapon, or as a cause for non-mutuality, look out.
Good.
Yeah, I think, what you've heard here, and I would just echo that, is this is a big issue. It's a big issue that hits all of us. We have, like I said, we're a small company, a little over 200 people, but we have in those 200 people about 40 different nationalities, countries of origin. So we're very diverse in terms of national origin, which also means we're reasonably diverse in terms of religion. What we found is that we're very values driven. Now, there's a high correlation. There tends to be a high correlation between people who really are attracted to companies that are value driven and people of faith. That is not a criteria. It's not something that we look at. In fact, we don't know it, and we don't want to know in a way. But we want to know people are values driven. People come at their values from different perspectives. And the commitment that they have to values, like I said, often comes through faith. And we have people who have no faith, but still have those values. So we have a whole group. The issue is exactly what you said. How do you be so vigilant not to allow people to use it as levers or use it as power? And I think this is something we try to just keep our eyes on very closely, that when we see people coding, like dropping hints or things that are maybe like within one faith kind of to each other, those we go at right away to say we are not going to create a hostile environment for people of other faiths. What faith you have, that's fine. In fact, we're glad, we appreciate it, but we don't use it as levers. We do not use it as power. And I think it's something that you have to be just so on. Now, like I said, we've got a small company, and it feels big, which compared to your company, it's tiny. But
It's big compared to my company.
but it feels like we have to be even more vigilant as it's getting larger. And sometimes I feel like we're losing that battle a little bit, because it's a slippery slope from saying you're a values-oriented company and people of faith that are attracted to saying, okay, you have to know kind of the code words. You have to know kind of, there's certain ways we do things that are really kind of faith-driven. So, I mean, I don't know the answer. I just do know that it could get out of control if it's not carefully watched and monitored.
Can I give one example of how that worked? I was called into a firm in Michigan that was an evangelical, had an evangelical CEO. It was a family business. He was within his rights to have prayer every day at the firm. And they'd asked me to come in and walk through with them how they might bring their faith beliefs into their corporate strategy, into their product planning, their employee. And we sat for a day talking about it. And then he mentioned this issue that they always started with a prayer. And I asked him if everyone there was of the same denomination at the same church. Was he just replicating a community that had formed around the church? And he said, no, but we never offend people. They know we mean no offense. And of course it was tied to power.
Yes, it is.
So we talked about this. And said, here's a simple test. If this is not tied to power, do you have one person in your organization who is not evangelical Christian? Yes, we have a Muslim on the factory floor. I said, would you allow him to lead your prayer for the other 250 people on the factory floor tomorrow? Well, they might be offended. Now, maybe they could have tolerated that level of prayer practice, but how would you know? How would you know? So I said, well, maybe you're using your religion to exploit. Think about it. So what did he do? He got up in front of his employees and he said, I was just asked if I'm using religion in an exploitative way. And not everyone said, oh, no, you're not. And they've now worked on how they can have prayer at work privately, but not. But how often do we test these waters? We don't even have a language for it. So it's very, very touchy stuff. And I commend you for struggling with it. Yeah.
Well, if I can, I can say that we had a similar, we've been very careful that is not something that's going to be publicly displayed, because it's the line between that display, even if you say we don't mean anything by it, there's still, depending on positions that you're in, you are using it as power. And but the way it actually came to light, and we spent a lot of time talking about this, is because somebody raised their hand and said, I'm worried about this. And this is a person who, self-proclaimed atheist, who said, I don't believe any of this, and I'm afraid this is going on. And it's something that's been really good, because what it did is it forced us to all say, okay, what is the issue and how are we handling it? And these are people that, we're going back kind of regularly to people and saying, are you feeling that? And again, my concern is as we get larger, people say, oh no, when they really mean yes. The question is, I think as you get larger, I'm not sure people tell you the truth as much as they really should.
Well, Mike, I think when you talked about juxtapositioning values, religion, that's the critical piece. Coming up with common values and setting your mutuality on the common values versus the differences in religion, but accepting the differences in religion. And I think the other thing that you said, which I think is important, is really understanding in the organization what the associates believe and think about how they're being treated. And we, in our efforts to move from what I called sort of phase 1 of diversity to phase 2, we instituted a quarterly anonymous survey, we call it Pulse Survey, where we go out with just 10 questions out of our annual survey and do it every quarter. How do you feel you're being treated? Are you being fairly treated? Do you feel you have equal opportunity for promotion? Do you feel intimidated in any way? And so we had, I forget exactly what the questions were, but there are 10 questions out of this larger base just to see over time whether people really believe it. Because in an anonymous survey, you're going to get, hopefully get the truth. But I think that's important to do.
I'll present myself as a test case, and then an example of what we tried to do. And then this is it's open for, in fact, I'd love to hear feedback about it. Then we'll go to a group. How I've tried to do that in our company is to say we call it 3 deeply held beliefs that we hold. And those are respect for the intrinsic value of every person, that we are relational creatures meant to live and work in relationship, and that we are all responsible to use our gifts to enable the mission of the organization to flourish. Now, those 3 things all come, you can argue, as a religious person, in my case, as a Christian. Respect for the individual can come from your understanding of people made in the image of God. If you're Immanuel Kant, you would say that people are ends, not means. So you can come at that a lot of different ways. Relationship says that we are made for each other. We are created like this. But there's a lot of different approaches from sociology and from psychology to say, yes, that's correct. And responsibility is a language that reaches well across all kinds of religions to talk about the human responsibility in life. We found that when we use this in orientation meetings and we ask people to fill in the blanks what respect means for them, it enables them to bring their own particular perspectives into that language and creates a really interesting dialogue and conversation about those 3 words and what they mean. We found just that kind of conversation alone is very important for helping frame people with their understanding of what we hold deeply to be important in our company. So that's one attempt to say this is an opening up of a language, but a language that's congruent with folks from a lot of different perspectives.